It has been said that the Moonswatch, the Scuba, the Royal Pop could diminish the brands of Omega, Blancpain, and Audemars Piguet. But I would say that two of those brands, and possibly all three, wouldn't even exist if it wasn't for the plastic quartz king of Switzerland. It's an amazing story that starts with a Cuban-American businessman challenging the largest movement manufacturer in Switzerland at the height of the quartz crisis to take on the Japanese. It involves this guy being the Thomas Edison of Switzerland by taking credit for the work of this guy, work that required a new way of building a watch movement that's still used today in the battle for the world's thinnest watch movement, work that required a new way of manufacturing, a new way of marketing Swiss watches, all in the middle of a collapse of a 200-year-old system that was rooting for them to fail. This is the history of Swatch. In 1978, the Swiss watch industry was in shambles. The quartz watch came from Japan in 1969. Over the past 10 years, people were looking at Japan as being the place you got your watch. They were cheaper, they were more accurate, they were more interesting. The designs that were coming out of there and what they were building was surpassing everything coming out of Switzerland. So brands were failing. Mom and pop shops have been open for generations, were going under. The few brands that were okay were buying these other places in order to keep them open so these mom and pop shops would still exist. But still, employment was going from 50,000 people working at a movement manufacturer to 1,500. Things were falling apart. It was an absolute free fall. It was in the midst of this situation in 1978 that Gary Greenberg, the Cuban-American businessman that was the distributor for Piaget North America, went to Bosch's SA, or as we know him today, ETA. Went to them and said, hey, I know how to make my money selling thin luxury watches, but the Japanese just came out with a 2.5 millimeter thick quartz watch. As a 0.98 millimeter thick movement, 2.5 millimeters total. I need you to make me a watch that is smaller than them. I want the world's thinnest watch. I'm gonna market it with my new brand, the Concorde. If you can do that, I'll give you 2 million Swiss francs. Now that 2 million Swiss franc challenge was not something the new head of ASUAG, Dr. Ernst Thomke, could say no to. ASUAG is this big conglomerate that was one of the few people who had some sort of money on hand in Switzerland. They were the biggest movement manufacturer with Bosch's SA and ETA. They were buying brands that were going broke. Longines, Hamilton, Certino, Rado. They were buying all these mom and pop shops to try and keep some sort of semblance of the know-how to build Swiss watches. But they were still bleeding lots of money. And Dr. Ernst came back from his profession to try and help save this industry. Dr. Ernst was a really interesting character. He started his working life as a teenager being a tool maker at ETA. He started by learning how to make the tools that made the watches, and went to night school to finish high school. But he was a really good student, so he went on to actually become an MD. He was a doctor, as in a medical doctor. He went to work for the Swiss Institute for Fighting Cancer in tumor research, and eventually owned his own pharmaceutical company. But seeing the Swiss watch industry, the thing that gave him pride as a kid, the thing that he grew up doing, he wanted to give back to that. He wanted to try and save it. So he gave up his position as CEO of a pharmaceutical company to go back to run ETA and its parent company as a new CEO to try and save it. In his own words, he said, I couldn't just watch everything go down here. The watch industry was stagnant. She didn't just produce watches far too slowly or too expensive. Their superiors were corrupt from the decadence of the rich and infected the products with their inferior quality. This was a guy with an opinion, and when he got to become the new CEO of ASUAG, he saw that the 100 mom and pop companies that they had acquired to try and save them were each doing their own R&D, their own marketing, their own payroll, every little thing that could have been brought together to save money, to save jobs, to save the industry was nothing was being done. It was just as if everything was fine. It was basically playing the fiddle and rearranging the deck chairs as the Titanic sank. Something needed to be done, and Dr. Ernst got to work. To earn this 2 million Swiss franc bonus, this team needed to get to work, and they did. The next year, in 1979 Baselworld, the Concorde Delirium was brought out, 1.98 millimeters. They had beaten the Japanese, their 2.5 millimeter game, because they didn't make a movement and then a thin case. They used the case back of the case as the back base plate of the movement and then built it on there. This is a technique that's still used today by Piaget, by Bulgari, by Richard Mille to create the world's thinnest watches. It is the technique that's been used since then, and it's also the technique that was developed to help save parts that went into the Swatch. In fact, even in 1979, when they brought out the Delirium, for $4,400, you could get yourself the world's thinnest watch in quartz, in gold, the Concorde Delirium. Now, $4,400 in 1979 is a very expensive watch, but Dr. Ernst saw that there was a possibility of this technology, of this manufacturing with less parts to put things on the base plate like that. And they had already started talking about the Delirium Vulgare, or the Delirium for the masses. They were talking to journalists about it in 1979. And that Delirium Vulgare would eventually go under a different name, the Swatch. The goal of the Delirium Vulgare was to take the lessons learned from the Delirium, make a watch that takes use of the back plate, uses less parts, put it in a plastic case, make it inexpensive, because you can make a Swiss watch with Swiss accuracy, made in Switzerland, for a low price. You could take the fight to the Japanese. You could say, cool, you can get an inexpensive watch from Japan, but won't you want an inexpensive watch from Switzerland that has the Swiss timing and the Swiss prestige? Because that still carried something. It still carries something today. So that was the goal. Now, this wasn't an easy goal. By March 1980, there was a question of how could this be done? Was it possible? And Dr. Ernst just laid down the gauntlet, put two of his engineers in a room, Jacques Moeller and Elmar Mach. Put them in a room, said, figure it out. Give me a sketch. You have 2 hours. Really put the hammer to them, and they came back with this sketch, the basic idea that would become the Delirium Vulgare. And even on the sketch, it says the Vulgare at the time. Dr. Ernst saw this and went, sounds good. You have 6 months, you have $500,000, go make me the watch. Well, in December, about 9 months later, they had the watch. There were a few problems along the way, but they figured out how to make a 51 component watch when there was usually 91 components to the most basic quartz watch. They removed as many components as possible. They also had the problem of they didn't have the injection molding technology to make the watch, so they actually had to go to the kings of injection molding at Precision, Lego. The first Swatch prototype was made at Lego. So now it is the end of 1980 and they had the prototype. Time for the next stage. Over the next year and a half, Etta figured out the injection molding, how to make the movement, how to make it with less than 1% error rate, and how to make it without any human intervention. So they were able to produce as quickly as possible, as cheaply as possible, because they could build the entire thing for 10 Swiss francs and then sell it for 40, 50 Swiss francs. This meant that with a little bit of investment, they can create new models, sell them across the globe for a reasonable price. It is a Swiss precision watch at a reasonable price. Question is, did anybody want it? The first 10,000 watches were sent to Dallas, Texas. They were hand-built before the assembly line got going, and it was a test to see how well they would do. This was October 1982. And the answer was, it didn't go well. It did not go well. Some were sold. They sold, but it was not what they were hoping for at all. There was not a big uproar or want for them. there was a lot of lessons still to be learned. They learned just because it was Swiss and just because it's inexpensive didn't mean people would want it. As Fritz Amann, a later head of Swatch, would say, nobody liked them. They were ugly. They were olive green, poop brown, mouse gray. These were not things that looked good. They were monochromatic and did not say Swatch to anybody of what would become Swatch. Dr. Ernst said that it looked hopeless at the time. In fact, the initial response was, maybe we could sell this to a competitor. They offered Swatch to Timex, and Timex said, no, we're okay. Timex didn't want the technology, didn't want the idea of these plastic watches or of the new way of making a movement. So even Timex, who was one of the few healthy companies at this time, said, no, we're okay. You guys have fun with that. It was proof that price and performance alone were not enough. You also had to bring something that enticed people to the product. So they went back to the drawing board and brought in some marketing people. Enter a guy that they called Mad Max. He's the first guy to come in and say, hey, these things are great. And you called this the Swatch initially because it was a Swiss watch. Cool. But the one thing that you look at this and the price point is you should be saying that it's of the price point and the design that somebody who buys 4 pairs of jeans and 4 pairs of sneakers should have 4 swatches. They should have it as part of their outfit, should buy more than just one. And this was echoed by another person in the marketing department that they brought in, Franz Speicher. He saw that when people did buy the Swatch in the test market, they didn't buy one, they bought 2, 3, 4. They went back for every color. And his thought then was, we shouldn't call it a Swiss watch for the Swatch, we should call it the second watch. It is the watch that you buy again and again. You have other watches, you might have a nice high-end watch, but the Swatch is the one that you're going to change with the outfit. It's going to be part of your identity. It's going to show where you went or what art you like or who you are. Like, this is the one that you buy multiples of. It is not just your first watch, it is your second watch. And that's what became the marketing material for Swatch. So they decided, let's do it. So on March 1st, 1983, Dr. Ernst went to Gretchen, Switzerland and announced worldwide. He declared that the Swatch might become not only a fashion watch of the future, but also a second watch for leisure and sports activities in preference over cheap models from the Far East. And he was right. In 1983, they sold $3 million worth of Swiss watches. Not bad. 2 years later, it was over 100 million. And it would continue to grow. The Swatch had arrived, and thanks to some great marketing, the idea of a second watch that was for leisure, for any activity, for sports, for whatever you were into, became the theme. The marketing of Swatch was amazing and everywhere. If you are a child of the 80s or 90s, you owned one. You still might own one. The marketing was incredible. They would sponsor breakdancing competitions, colorful ads on print, on TV. When they wanted to launch a new Swatch for a new country, they would put one on the side of a building that was 500 feet tall. That's insane. You don't miss that. That is great marketing. You don't even need to run an ad. You can just put it there and let all the local news cover it because you can't miss it. This new marketing and new approach would help Swatch take over the world. And it would not just stop at the basic Swatch. Throughout the years, they come out with the Jelly, the Limelight, the Pop, which of course has come back into fashion with the Royal Pop. The Artist Edition, editions based on what location you went into. The Scuba, they even had an early automatic version. They made a square version, the Irony, which is in metal, including a platinum version. They made chronograph versions, and my favorite, the Maxi. The engineering team at Swatch earned such a great reputation. They were brought in for other things like a Swatch phone or other Swatch products, but the one that actually has a lasting history to it was when they teamed up with Mercedes-Benz and made the Swatch Mercedes Art Car, or as we all know it today, the Smart Car. Yeah, the Smart Car is the Swatch car. So there's that. And up to this point where all this success happened, when you talk to people that were around that time or articles written about it, they'll tell you that companies were trying not to sell them products as they were building out the manufacturing. Companies tried to find ways to stall them or make them fail. The entire Swiss watch industry thought that this plastic quartz watch was an abomination compared to what they had been for the past 200 years, whereas Swiss manufacturing, precision, and classical craftsmanship mattered more than anything else. But without this little plastic watch, they wouldn't exist anymore. They would go by the wayside. It's really important to remember that this money went somewhere. Now, if you've heard the story before of how Swatch saved the Swiss watch industry, or are familiar with the story of the rebranding of the entire Swiss watch industry at this point, you might be wondering where the name Hayek has been. Because Nicholas Hayek gets so much credit for saving the Swiss watch industry, as he should. But he did so on the back of the sales of Swatch. And that should be remembered, and the credit there should be given to who earned it. So in 1980, the Swiss banks were looking at their investments in ASUAG and SSIH, another conglomerate that was primarily known for Omega and Tissot. Well, these two brands were borrowing money, and they were hemorrhaging money at the same time, so the banks were wondering what to do with them, and they decided to bring in a consultant. The consultant was Nicholas Hayek. And he started looking at the brand, specifically SSIH at first. And then in 1982, went and looked at ASUAG also. And in 1982, Hayek produced what's been called the Hayek Report, which was what is wrong with the Swiss watch industry and how we can fix it. In it, he mentions everything that Ernst Thomke was talking about, how the R&D and the marketing and the production was just spread across all of these brands when it could be consolidated. If they're in the same company, they should work together to do it together and save money. The amount of waste was incredible, and he was right on that, just like Dr. Ernst was right. He also included in that report that the idea of an inexpensive watch could help save some of the industry because it could be produced cheaply and the sales from it could help fund other things. Mind you, this is 1982. He's already looked at ASUAG suddenly and seen that they already have a prototype for it, and they're already working on a test market for the models. So the Swatch was already in production as a test market before this report came out. In late 1983, the banks decided to cut their losses and offered Nicholas Hayek a chance, if he wanted to buy these two companies. And he got a group of investors together, and he started the process of buying them in late 1983. Mind you, Swatch had already launched at this point and earlier in the year. And by the end of 83 or in 84, Nicholas Hayek had finished purchasing his company with his investment group. And by 1985, would actually own 51% of ASUAG and SSIH that would be combined into one company called SMH at this point. This new brand that came together, Nicholas Hayek was chairman of the board, and SMH is usually joked as Sa Majesty Hayek, as in His Majesty Hayek is the guy who runs everything. He was in charge of the board. The CEO of the company, Dr. Ernst Thomke. He was the guy running SMH day in, day out. And he was the one that was implementing his plan and Hayek's plan to streamline the industry, to use the sales of Swatch, because by 1985, when this new company was fully founded, Swatch was selling over $100 million worth of watches, and it was just growing and growing. The train had left the station. It was on a runaway success. The money from the sales of Swatch, these 100 million plus that kept growing, is what helped funded the changes needed in all of these other brands. Omega was fielding offers to sell to Japan at that point. They were almost not a Swiss brand anymore. Tissot needed help, Longines needed help. The configuring of where these brands should be in the market was happening thanks to the budget Swatch gave them. Swatch allowed them to have the budget to create new marketing, to create new models, to change the way they do everything and become a streamlined company. And Hayek was great at creating this streamlined company and looking at it. And Dr. Ernst was great at helping him implement this vision, because it was the same one he shared when he came into ASUAG in 1978, but he didn't have the money for it yet. Now his creation gave him the money. It gave Hayek the money. It allowed for this company to come together and change the fortune of the Swiss watch industry and reinvest in the idea of mechanical watchmaking as a luxury product, and to have it be at the higher end where Omega competes against Rolex, where Longines and Tissot compete for a middle ground, and Swatch is on the base level of getting people in the watches and helps fund the whole thing. The impact on SMH was so big that in 1998, Hayek renamed the entire group the Swatch Group, and that's what we know it as today. The Swatch Group is one of the three biggest watch companies outside of Rolex and Richemont. The renaming of SMH to Swatch Group is a testament to how important this little plastic watch is, what it did for the industry. So with all of this in mind, what happened to Dr. Thomke? Well, if you look at Swatch's own website, they'll tell you that Nicholas G. Hayek said that his strategy included the creation of a low-cost, high-tech, artistic, and emotional Swiss-made second watch, the Swatch. Made from just 51 components and assembled on automatic production lines with a Swiss-made movement, the watch is the initial spark for the remarkable upswing in the Swatch watch industry, none of which Hayek was involved in. By the time he came around, the Swatch was already thought of, designed, made, prototyped, marketed, and launched. It was already on a successful upswing. All of it was already in place. Did Hayek embrace it? Oh yeah, you embraced the money machine. Did he take great use of that money and help revitalize and save the Swiss watch industry? Absolutely, and he deserves credit for that. But taking credit for the Swatch and its creation and marketing, that's a step too far. To me, it is what Thomas Edison did to other scientists and take credit for the work. It is the thing that we should say, hey man, that one you don't get to say. You deserve so much credit. Hayek deserves so much credit for what he did in managing a crisis, but the Swatch came from Dr. Thomke and his team. It predates Nicholas Hayek and their success and their lessons learned off of it, that they were able to change the pace and change and swivel to a different idea once they saw the test market not work well, took the lessons from that and immediately relaunched 5 months later to the world, and the success they had, that deserves some credit. But Dr. Ernst and Nicholas Hayek are very different people. Hayek is known for wearing all the watches on his wrist. He's known for being big and boisterous, yelling at people, holding grudges. He is a larger-than-life figure. Dr. Thomke is known for having a very bare-bones office, not being the big boisterous. He's about the work. It's not about being big and loud. And so he is not the guy to sit here and yell and take credit. His passion was to help save the company, and he did. He left being a doctor doing research in tumors and his own pharmaceutical company that he was running to help save the watch industry. And he did so. He did what he was looking to do. So as these two great leaders, that two very different styles, butted heads over the years, by 1991, Dr. Thomke had had enough. Hayek owned 51% of the company. He can do whatever he wanted. So Thomke decided, I'm good. The industry's in good hands now. I'm leaving. And with that, Dr. Thomke handed in his resignation, said that I'm giving up all my managerial duties. I'm leaving. I'm doing this at my own request. Here you go. And out of a last bit of spite, Hayek, when he announced it to the rest of the company, made sure to remove the at his own request. He removed the fact of his resignation that he did it on his own. He basically made it sound like he was forcing him out, instead of having everyone know that Thomke was like, yeah, I'm done, I'm leaving. Instead, it made it sound like Hayek told him to leave. And with that, it was just one last twist of the knife from somebody who needed to take all the credit. He made sure that from then on, the Swatch was his idea. He didn't want somebody else getting the credit. And Dr. Ernst went to a completely different field. Dr. Ernst would go on to be CEO of companies in energy, aviation, and biomedical fields. So he did fine for himself, but he left the watch industry in good hands to others at that point. Now, fast forward to the 2000s, and Swatch is having to deal with the fact that we have smartphones in all of our pockets. Generally, buying inexpensive watches has gone through the wayside. They have done okay, and they still make money because people buy the Swatch for nostalgia. They buy it as the perfect first watch for their kids, or they buy it as a souvenir on vacation. The Swatch still does okay. It, of course, is nowhere near it was in its heydays in the late 80s and mid 90s. Swatch did continue to develop newer technologies like the System 51, where they created a 51-part completely mechanical watch movement that was built completely by machines and no human involvement, and allowed for the first time an inexpensive mechanical watch on the Swatch platform. And the System 51 certainly had some interesting models. Hodinkee made quite a few of them, and there's many special editions made. They've created the Swatch Your Own Way, where you make your own Swatch, or the Swatch Now AI data, where you're able to just type in a prompt and the Swatch creates a Swatch for you that you can order that's a one-off for you. And those are some really interesting technology. What really brought Swatch back into the consciousness of people, though, was the Moonswatch, and then the Scuba and the Royal Pop. These are exactly what Swatch was made to do. The Delirium Vulgare, bringing the delirium to the masses, bringing the Speedmaster, the 50 Fathoms, the Royal Oak to the masses with these watches. It's exactly their reason for being. And with that, I think these are great examples of what the Swiss watch industry can do to help make itself relevant, because bringing this excitement of these less expensive watches to the people. Yes, they're plastic, they're either quartz or the System 51 that can't be fixed, mechanical movement. So they are temporary. They are a swatch, a second watch. They are not meant to be pieces that you can pass down. But what they are is bringing a less expensive version of the big icons to the people so that they can have a piece of it, enjoy it, get into watches, and have the excitement of it. Because people who had the Swatch in the 80s and 90s are the people buying higher end watches today. Getting people excited about watches is the most important thing for Swatch to do. By bringing the Speedmaster Vulgare and the Royal Oak Vulgare to the masses, bringing these watches to more people and putting it in front of more people, different ways to do it, bringing back the pop, bringing a basic Moonswatch, bring a Blancpain that is still a mechanical watch, but to more people, is exactly who Swatch is. And because of that is why those brands even exist. The money they brought in allowed for Omega not to be sold to Japan. It allowed for Blancpain to be in an environment where people cared about mechanical watches again. And that care about mechanical watches is what allows AP to hold the position near the high end of the market. Swatch is why they're there. So giving a little back to them, allowing them to take those designs and bringing them more people, I think is something that should be done. I think it's something that fits exactly who Swatch is, and is a remembrance that without them, there is no Swiss watch industry. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. Also check out on Apple or Spotify our Married to Watches podcast, released every Monday, where me and my wife go more into details about everything we love about watches, including the history of Swatch. Have a good one.